So as Masa said, I'm Chris. The talk title I gave here is Dropbox View from the Inside, but I'm actually just going to be talking about sort of lessons learned when doing a startup, and sort of the things that are good, things that are bad, and sort of the emotional journey you go through along the way. So yeah, that's basically this, and I'll cover like some common misconceptions I hear, especially for like students and stuff. So a bit about me. I was an MIT undergrad from 2009, and I actually dropped out my last semester, basically dropped out to work on a startup. And I worked on with a friend. We had like a few different ideas, and one idea that got the most traction was link.com. And we ended up doing Y Combinator, one of those like chicken slurry machines John mentioned. And worked on it about a year and a half, had some ups and downs, and eventually we got acquired by dictionary.com. So it was a pretty good run for us. Could have been worse, could have been better, but ooh. Yeah. And so after that, I went back to school for about 9 months to finish this master's program I left. And then as soon as the master's program was over, I joined Dropbox. And so I actually got to know the Dropbox folks while doing my own startup. And I've been there for 2.5 years. And it's been really cool, like seeing the company grow about 10 times. So all this stuff I'm going to talk about is basically from this experience, doing my own startup and also just seeing Dropbox grow. So just to give you some disclaimers here, a lot of the stuff I talk about is going to be most relevant to people working on consumer like web startups. B2B mostly it applies to, but if you're building like hardware, a lot of this philosophy doesn't always apply. It's just a mix of my own understanding. So here's some of the good things about doing startups, some of the awesome things. In the day-to-day life, a really like overriding thing that's really great about it is just the total freedom that you'll have. So, and this is like freedom from like school, from this like structured way of living that you're pretty used to, and from like the 9-to-5 job. You have total freedom to kind of do whatever you want to kind of create your own destiny. As your company gets larger, you might become more and more constrained by it, but especially in the early days, you'll just feel an immense amount of freedom, which can be pretty awesome. I've also made like incredible friendships for working on startups. There's something about like being like stuck in this like kind of going through this like stressful thing together, building something awesome that like really binds you really tightly. So I've made some like really awesome friends just through doing startups and stuff. It's one of the most rewarding aspects. You get to like break out of the traditional ladders. You don't have to climb the traditional sort of totem pole. Your success is just measured by your success, not like your performance at a particular job. So it's been pretty awesome. It hopefully is going to give you a chance to be truly passionate about what you do. Chances are if you're doing a startup, you're going to be a lot more excited about that than you would be with a typical job. So it's some of the awesome things. And learning-wise, it's been sort of an amazing learning opportunity for me too. I didn't realize how much non-technical things I'd learn about doing a startup. Like I've like sort of developed in so many ways just by like having to do my own startup for. Learned how to network, recruit. I've learned a bit about design, project management, speaking in front of people. All those are things that I sort of developed through doing a startup. And if I hadn't done it, like I wouldn't be as diverse as a person that I am now. It's also just sort of a really unique experience you can't pay for. There's actually this class at MIT where it's sort of about startups, and you learn some stuff, and then at the end of the class, it's the summer, and they're just like, yeah, now you've learned some stuff, like go to a startup, go spend the next 3 months doing it, because they know that's really like the best way for you to learn a lot of this stuff. And ultimately, like it's a really unparalleled combination of both like breadth and depth in a lot of ways. And this ties into this hypercube theory, which let me talk about. So here's a quote from Drew. So Drew Houston is like the founder of Dropbox. He's a pretty cool guy I respect a lot. So I'm gonna like quote him a few times in here. And this is this is on his application to Y Combinator. Y Combinator is this cool group of folks that funded my startup and funded Dropbox in the early days. And in this application, one of the things he says is, this idea, that's Dropbox, requires executing well in several somewhat orthogonal directions, and missteps in any torpedo the entire product. So let's like think about what that means here. What he's saying is that like the success of a startup often depends on multiple somewhat like unrelated dimensions. So your success is going to depend on things like your front end, how responsive it is, your back end, whether it's scalable, whether it's performant, your design, your recruiting, your marketing, all these sorts of things are unrelated to each other, but are really important for the success of your product. So you can think about this as sort of being a multi-dimensional like hypercube. So if you take all of these things and you multiply them together, you get sort of the volume of this hypercube. And you think of the volume of the cube as being like the value or the success that your startup creates. And the important thing to realize here is that if any of those things is 0, then the volume of the cube is going to be 0. So if you fail completely in any single dimension, like you're probably not going to succeed at all. So that's why startups ultimately can become are this like culmination of breadth and depth, because you need to like succeed in like all these different dimensions at least somewhat well. So that was kind of the good stuff. Now we can talk about some of the bad things, or at least some of the more challenging things. Going in is going to require an all-out sacrifice. At least initially, like your first time, you're probably going to spend a lot on it. Experienced entrepreneurs can be a little better about that, but your first time, it's probably going to consume a lot of your life. This sounds heroic, but after like a year or two, it might not feel as heroic. I know, so when we ended up selling our company, Linked, we kind of chose to sell it because we were really, really tired doing it. And we're kind of at an emotional low point, which I'll also talk about. And that freedom I talked about, how you have this total freedom, that can be harmful too, or just depressing, because you don't have like a structure or a plan. Like there's some points where like I'd wake up in the morning at like noon, and like I'd look around, I'd be like me and like 2 dudes like in my living room like coding, and I'd just be like, what am I doing with my life? Stuff like that would happen too. Family and friends, society, might not always support you. I remember like going to like parties right after I graduated and talking to friends who friends who like doing investment banking. I have a friend like working at Google, and like, oh, like what do you do, Chris? Like, oh, well, I get up every day and I code with 2 other dudes like in my living room. Like, so you're like unemployed? Like, no, I'm self-employed, is what I tell them. So sometimes it's hard dealing with the rest of the world. And for those of you also thinking about dropping out of college to go to a startup, you can do that, and you can even go back to school afterwards, but just sort of recognize that you're going to be giving up like that college experience. Like you might be able to go back to school and get your education later, but that college experience, after you drop out, it's really hard to get that back again. That's just because you've been out for a year or 2, a lot of people have moved on, you've had this different experience, you sort of are going to lose that college experience. Another thing might be bad is you won't get rich, and you might think you will, but statistically speaking, like you probably won't. If you're a big success, you probably will, but you shouldn't count on it. If you do want to get rich, I recommend these things: finance, banking, hedge funds. Give me a resume, come work at Dropbox. I'll probably give you a better chance at getting rich and making money than like a startup will, just statistically speaking. You're also going to get sad. When you're working on this like thing you helped create, you get like really emotionally invested in it, and so every sort of minor like bump can make you really happy, and every minor like dip can make you really sad. So you get a lot more emotionally invested in this thing because it's your baby than you would like compare to like sort of a 9-to-5 job. And as we've already been over in this conference, you're going to fail like at least at something. Like seriously, you're going to fail. I know we've been over it, but I just want to reemphasize that. Here's this cool graph. I don't think, I can kind of see it. So this was on a whiteboard at the Y Combinator office when I was going through Y Combinator. And this sort of graph describes like the emotional ups and downs of working on your own thing. Here's like a cleaned up version of it. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah. So you can see here, this like the tech crunch of initiation, the wearing off of novelty, and my favorite right there is the trough of sorrow. This is like when you're very, very sad. And ultimately, this actually ends kind of optimistically. You're getting happy again, but it's not always how it goes necessarily. So this kind of describes this like emotional roller coaster pretty well. Another depressing thing about working on a startup is that often it's not really just all about your skill. There's like a component of luck, like a component of things you just can't control. So I'll jump into another quote from Drew. He's talking about Arash. So Arash is his co-founder for Dropbox, and the story there is that he had this idea for Dropbox, but he needed someone to work on it with him. And so he met Arash, like through a mutual friend, and just overnight they decided to go work on this company together. And as you can see from the quote, there were 100 ways that they could have failed. Like that relationship between Arash and Drew could have really like failed. One of them could have had some neurosis. They could have like not worked effectively for each other, but just so happened out of luck that it worked out. And that's just something that they can't really control. So So often how you do is going to be a product of both your skill, how well you execute, but also luck is in a component. That's sort of depressing that you can't really control that. If you see this across history too, if you look at every historically super great company, they're really, really good in a lot of ways, but they also had a lot of luck. Especially in the founding, a lot of things just happen to go right for them. And that's something you can't control and it sort of sucks. Things can also fall apart, working in a startup and stuff. I talked about those awesome friendships you can create. I've also seen startups destroy amazing friendships. When I was working on Linked, one of my roommates, two of my roommates at the time were these two guys. They'd known each other since elementary school. They're awesome friends together. They were building this company together. And the company, it looked like it was going really well. And then the company literally caught on fire. Their product caught on fire. It got on TechCrunch, and it just totally torpedoed the company. And it also sort of caught their friendship on fire. These guys were friends since elementary school, and because they went through this emotional roller coaster together, they lost a lot of that. They sort of they started mistrusting each other, didn't trust each other as much anymore. It got really tough. The same thing will apply to relationships you have. Health. I think in Montenegro, do you have socialized healthcare? Is this true? Well, in the U.S. at least, you need health insurance, and I was really poor for a long time. I didn't have any health insurance. I was really afraid of getting hit by a bus and being in debt for the rest of my life. So health can be harmful too. Another situation that can be tough is you raise some money, you hire people One of them is a really good friend, and it turns out 6 months later that friend's not doing too well. They're not a great fit for the company, and you have to fire this person who's your best friend. That can hurt a lot. That can be tough. Stuff's not always going to be fair either. There's always going to be things you don't feel great about, like stock, salary, positions, advancements. Startups aren't a perfect meritocracy either. Sometimes they're actually worse. They get this more wrong than big organizations in being meritocratic and sort of fairly evaluating and compensating people. So that stuff's going to be rough too. Anyway, all that was really depressing. I don't want to depress you guys too much, so I want to amp you back up about doing startups. And so here's some sort of common misconceptions I see, and I'll try to address these things. So really common one I hear is that you can always do this later. I think we've already talked about this a bit, but you'll think you can always do this later, but really the best time to do it is probably now. Switching costs is going to get higher and higher as you get older, and you get more connected to people. It's harder to lose what you've been working on. You can only go all in burden-free for so many years. Here's another one I hear a lot. I hear this a lot from CS students or people who are really techie, and this is something I totally believed in college, and that's that technical superiority of the product is totally what makes you win, right? It's definitely not the case. It's just this hypercube of all these different things here. But I totally thought this was the case when I was back in the day. And you can look at actually a good example of this is Dropbox and sort of the number of features we have. One of the most commonly requested things for Dropbox is the ability to make any folder sort of a Dropbox folder. Right now if you use Dropbox, there's only one folder that will sync. And even though people think they want a lot of different folders, ultimately it complicates the product in lots of weird ways, which I can do a whole other talk on that. And it's really not something people actually want, they just think they do. And so simplifying that, I think, has been has enabled Dropbox to win in a lot of ways that it wouldn't. And it's also just saved tons of time. Another one here is you'll go to grad school first. This goes back to I can always do this later. You're probably not going to be better in 5 years, 4 years of doing a startup unless you're studying exactly something you want to go work on. And another also thing about grad school in general, I tried out grad school for about a year and a half, and I think a lot of people get sucked into it just because it's the smart thing to do because they got into an awesome grad school program. But you really only go to grad school if you're actually really psyched about doing grad school. There's a lot of grad school dropouts too, and I think if more people just thought about that a little more before jumping into it, more people would be happy with their grad school experience. I love this one too. People who think that doing a startup is going to be, it's all about just having one really awesome idea. I really want to push back against that. You just need to be like, the idea needs not be so bad that like you doom yourself instantly, like you spend all your money or you lose all your credibility. It just needs to be not that bad. So a company that I knew back in like 2009, they're doing pretty well now. They're called Walkatron, but in 2009 they were they were an API for pizza delivery. And how it worked was like you went to their website, you clicked like order a pizza, and they would then call the pizza place and the pizza place would deliver it to you. That was probably a bad idea, actually. It wasn't really a great idea. But the team was like a really smart team and they really wanted to do something awesome in this space. And so they tried that idea for a while, realized it was a bad idea, kept trying like 3 different things, and eventually they got something now it hasn't launched yet, but it seems like it's pretty awesome. They've raised like $1 million and stuff. So that's just like one example of why like it's really not about having that one great idea. It's about being agile and like being able to change your idea quickly as well. Yeah, as I said. Another one here, misconceptions, that it's all about marketing and luck. And I talked about luck being a factor, but it's just like a factor. Where else does luck even give you a chance? The fact that like these awesome like companies have been able to rise really quickly, like sure they got lucky, but it also was a lot about skill. And the fact that like a company like Dropbox can become this like really big company in just like 4 or 5 years is pretty awesome. The fact that like luck like even gives them a chance to like compete against these like giant tech, these like big tech giants. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little about like decision making in startups and stuff. Here's another quote from Drew here. This is also on the Y Combinator application from 2007. It's prioritizing features and choosing the right market segments to tackle will be hard. Getting love from early adopters will be important, but getting distracted from releasing late due to frivolous feature requests could be fatal. And I really take this to heart. Obviously you need to work hard on like what you're doing, but plenty of people work hard. If someone else is working really hard, it's actually going to be impossible for you to work 10 times as hard as them. Maybe you can work twice as hard as like your competitor, but you can't work 10 times as hard. So what really is going to matter is working smarter, because you can definitely work 10 times smarter than people, or at least like 10 times like less dumb. It's like 1,000 times easier not to do something than to do something. And often but despite this, people often get trapped into doing things that don't actually help them. You'll see this a lot with like frivolous features requests, things that aren't as important. It's often like better for your product too to not do that thing that you think about doing. Ryan was up here talking about like an about.me, like things they thought they wanted to do, but they hadn't actually validated those ideas first, and it's easy to get trapped in that. Odds are at any given time, you're not really focusing on the optimal set of problems. You're not working as smart as you could. So constantly be thinking about that and reevaluating like where you're working, because it's how you're working and what you choose to work on that's really going to differentiate you, not just working harder. I see a lot of startups who kind of get stuck in like all these decisions. They can do all these different directions they can go. And I think a lot of them would benefit from just sort of stepping back a bit and thinking about like, what can I do just to get like 10 like really awesome users, 10 users who are like going to recommend this product to their friends. And then ask again for 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Keep scaling that up. I think that's kind of a simplifying philosophy, helping you decide like what's next. Well, that's actually all I had prepared for you guys today. I didn't actually talk much about Dropbox, but maybe we can like address some of that in the Q&A here. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, I guess we'll jump here. And then...
I prepared some questions.
Oh yeah? All right.
Yeah, I can prepare. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions.
Oh, thanks guys.
Big round of applause. And then afterwards, whoever has questions, just put up your hand and someone's going to bring a mic over, and then you can ask Chris whatever you feel like. So I actually wanted to do a really, really quick summary of some highlights that we've heard about like startup life. And I think it goes, you're going to be sad, you're going to lose friends, you're going to fail, and perhaps you will die as like the ultimate side effect, which is all good, which is, really real and like all fair warnings, all very realistic. But now, sort of to counter all of that reality that people need to be prepared for, I want you to tell us some of the absolute like happiest moments you had when you worked on Lings. And where did you get the idea from? Like, why, tools for foreign language teaching?
Yeah, I guess I never actually talked about what my startup did, Link did. Basically, me and my co-founder were really excited about foreign language education stuff. We felt like there were, and I still think this is true, there's so many ways in which like good technology can make foreign language education a lot better. Yeah. And turns out, there's lots of things wrong with that, or lots of things that make that hard. I think probably the most exciting point was actually that TechCrunch of initiation. We talked to this TechCrunch reporter, and we weren't really sure when the article was going to go live.
Was he as nice as John Biggs?
He was actually a lot nicer than John Biggs.
No.
Just kidding, John. So we got this TechCrunch article. It was pretty exciting. We didn't know when it was going to happen. And it actually happened while I was on a road trip across America, and I just drove across like the Hoover Dam. And so I'm like tethered to my phone, like making sure our servers doesn't crash. And I'm seeing like our counter go from like, 10 daily users to like thousands. And that was super exciting. That was probably a really high point. Also just like getting into Y Combinator, like getting this funding from this really awesome group of people. That was really awesome. And getting to meet some like really cool folks through there. Some of the high points, like I think like Mark Zuckerberg came and like talked to like our little like batch of like Y Combinator kids, and that was pretty cool.
He wanted to be your friend? That's awesome.
Well, I don't think he wanted to be my friend, but.
So did I understand correctly that you both worked and volunteered in Brazil and China?
Yeah, so me and my co-founder with Linked, we both had spent summers in China. We actually both spent 6 months in China. And so we had to like learn like Mandarin for that, and that was the first language we taught, was like Mandarin. Yeah.
Right. Awesome.
It was kind of through our frustration trying to learn Mandarin in this like.
That you
school.
came up with this idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really great. And then, so I mentioned how you had your both bachelor's and master's from MIT, mm-hmm. and obviously everyone in the room is aware that MIT is like a powerhouse when it comes to academia. But I wanted you to tell us a little bit like about what was really special for you personally being at MIT. Was it, just the coursework and the classes and the way it was structured and like the skills that they gave you, or was it something else?
What I liked about MIT, or?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed MIT a lot. The classwork and coursework were definitely pretty rigorous. I felt like I learned a lot. I think one of the things I liked most though was just the student body there and the folks I learned through it, the folks I met through it. So like my co-founder was like a really awesome guy. I'm gonna go see him in like Istanbul soon, and I probably wouldn't have met, I wouldn't have met him if I hadn't gone to MIT. And it's a pretty cool place to like meet people and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a really supportive it's a really supportive place for ideas. I talked about how like not all your friends will always support your startups and stuff, but most MIT people were actually pretty supportive of me. It's like people that were from like other parts of the world, from like investment banking, that'd be a little more suspicious of startups.
Yeah. What about the structure of education did you find really helpful, like the kind of coursework that you guys did? And
yeah, it was a pretty good course. I think it was pretty like rigorous course. Like my first like computer language at MIT was like Scheme, this like obscure functional programming language which you don't hear about much, but it was pretty rigorous. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then 4 days after you handed in your master's thesis, you left your Dropbox, right?
Yep. Well, it was actually 3 days.
3 days. How did that happen? How did you end up at Dropbox?
Yeah, so actually when I was doing Linked, I knew a bit about the Dropbox crew. In fact, actually, this is a good story. In 2007, I got an internship at Facebook. Facebook was like 80 engineers then. It was pretty small. It was their first intern class. I was like one of like 8 interns. And the Dropbox recruiter called me up one day. He was like, oh, hey, like Chris, like another MIT intern is coming. Yeah, his name's Arash. Like you should look him up. And so I looked up this guy, Arash. I'd never met him before. I'm like, all right, cool. Like we're going to be interns together. Yeah. And then like a few weeks later, the MIT recruiter calls me up again. It's like, oh yeah, Chris, never mind. Like that Arash guy, he's not going to be at Facebook. He's going to do some startup instead. I was like, whatever. So that startup ended up being Dropbox, and I almost interned with Arash. Right. And so that's kind of how I first sort of heard about Dropbox, and so I knew the folks through there. And I was really I had a lot of respect for like the people at Dropbox and what they had accomplished. And I thought a lot of the people in the team were really smart and like really awesome. So that's kind of why I joined. And I joined right after grad school, like 3 days after returning my thesis in. I was just like so excited. I didn't want to like delay it. In retrospect, maybe I should have taken like a month to like chill out, but
yeah,
it was pretty good.
So you moved to San Francisco straight away?
Yeah, I turned in my thesis and like I got on a flight the next day.
Nice. How'd you like the move to the West Coast? So you were in Boston for like 5 years prior to that, right?
like 6 years almost.
5 or 6 years.
California's a pretty fun place. I recommend everyone visit it. The weather, it's like the weather is now, but like all the time. It's just like 24/7,
Nice.
like 365 days a year.
Nice.
The vibe's pretty fun in California. It's a little more laid back than Boston.
Flip-flops all the time.
Flip-flops all the time, yeah. I
Nice.
brought some with me here.
Sounds pretty great. And could you tell us a little bit about the Dropbox culture? Like, what's it like? What are the
Sure.
people that you work for like?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to talk much about this, but I think Dropbox is a pretty awesome culture. It's a pretty laid-back environment, especially like on the engineering side. Like, no one's going to be in your face much about like getting in a particular time. One of like the really awesome like traditions we do every year is we have this thing called like Hack Week, where the whole company just sort of like sets aside their daily work and just sort of works on something they're really excited about, something they really want to do. And a lot of like awesome features of Dropbox have like come out of these like hack weeks where we just spend a week working on like random things. Sometimes they're not always that useful. Like one hack week project I had was like hooking up like a Microsoft Connect to like the Dropbox interface, so I could like stand in front of my computer and go like this, to, like control my like Dropbox, which was not useful at all, but like super fun to work on.
Yeah.
I also worked on like a full text search for Dropbox, which still hasn't seen the light of day, but it was pretty fun. It was usually some pretty awesome Hack Week projects, yeah.
Nice. And what about the people?
The people at Dropbox is why I initially like really wanted to join it, because I had a lot of respect for them, and I thought they were like
Right.
really smart and awesome people. I still think that's really true. The company is a lot bigger now than when I joined. It's like 400 people almost, but it's still like such
400 people?
Yeah, Dropbox is like 400.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really big compared
Wow.
to like when I joined.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a pretty like high hiring bar. So like it's really depressing like interviewing people and rejecting them all. But
Yeah.
it does
Don't
result.
say that.
But it does.
They're already sad because of all of the like failure.
But it does result in a really awesome group of people.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
think I have like so much respect for all of my colleagues. I think that like creates like a really happy environment where you like work,
Yeah.
when like you respect everyone you're working with.
Yeah, it's really nice to actually like the people that you work with. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you like the people you work
I
with?
love the people I work with.
All
I
right.
really do. Yeah, you've met them all. How could I not? They're awesome. So I know we have a lot of people in the room. We probably have a lot of questions. So I'm going to just have a question and a follow-up and then get those hands ready for the couple of minutes that we have left. So the two questions that I'm going to try to end up with are, so we have a lot of developers here. And actually, go ahead.
Hi. So your company was acquired, and then you went working for Dropbox. Why did you do that, and why didn't you start something new? Did you want to get rich, as you said?
Did I want to get rich? So, I talked about, doing a startup is a tremendous learning opportunity. And I felt like I learned a lot doing a startup in lots of non-technical ways. So I learned all these like soft skills. Like I learned all about business. I became much more like a socially adept like human being. I developed in a lot of ways, but the one way I actually felt like I didn't develop when doing a startup was like getting like better at like hard technical problems. Because when you're working on like a really early stage startups, like building like hard technology isn't actually that important. Like it's more important to get things out the door. So I actually kind of felt like my ability to like really build solve hard technical problems was sort of languishing when I was doing Linked. And I'm really like kind of nerd at heart, and I like doing hard technical things. And so I wanted to get back into that, and I thought that there were a lot of like hard problems I could go work on at Dropbox, and I had a lot of respect intellectually for the people there. And so that was why I chose to go work there instead of like doing my own thing. Was I wanted to get like better at like technology, and I felt it was a better way to do it.
More questions?
I liked your presentation. I have two comments. You talked a lot about luck. So scientifically, luck is kind of statistics.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke, probably you've heard it, that the guy that made fortune, billions in exits and selling his startup, was interviewed, and he was asked how he can explain his wisdom versus luck. He told the lady, I assume I had 90% luck and 10% was my wisdom. He was modest. So he asked, if you could change one thing what did you do? Said, of course, I'll exchange the 10% wisdom with more 10% of luck. So.
Where do you exchange that, sir?
Yeah, I'd love to exchange
I want
that.
to know where you do that.
Another comment, I did a survey once to check about continuity. So it's not said, but the fact is that percentage-wise, there is so little or few amount of entrepreneurs that really are having many successes. You have so many stories about those who made fortune, but statistically it's few, but there are really few, less than few that did once, twice, third time. So this is again a kind of a proof that you can have a list of what should you prevent, the mistakes you should prevent, but there is no recipe for success. This is my claim all the time. So because all those smart guys, actually they knew nothing. So they had luck or statistics.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
This is important.
Any more questions?
Who's one?
You're popular, Chris. Look at that.
Got 2, 3. That's not
Okay, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a couple of questions about Dropbox itself.
Sure.
First, we know you operate on a freemium basis, so if you can divulge that information, what's the current percentage of the free users to the paid users? Mostly because I think it's important for people to know how many, let's say, free users you have to generate until you get to the paying customer.
That's not actually a number I know, and I also think it's probably like a number we consider private. But maybe what I can tell you is that it's not a very big number. You know, it's probably like, you know, not very big. But despite that, Dropbox is a cash flow positive company. So Dropbox is still a startup, but despite being in sort of this hyper growth phase, we're still able to be cash flow positive. I think that speaks to the really just like what a great sort of business model it is. Like we don't need that many people paying for it for the whole thing to be profitable. Just because of how like the math works out and like our storage costs and the fact that we can scale the company to like 200 million people despite being so small. Yeah.
Okay. And the second part is, right now there are a number of third-party apps for Dropbox, both supported and unsupported. How do you balance between working with the community and allowing them to do something, and on the other hand, you have privacy issues because if you allow someone to go through Dropbox, maybe then you cannot protect the data as well.
So that's actually what I work on at Dropbox most of the times. I work on the API. You know, I don't know if there's many privacy issues there. As long as, you know, the app is asking the user for permission to do things, I don't see there being a big privacy issue. One thing we're trying to do is we're trying to make it easier for apps to do what they want to do without needing more access, so like constraining what apps can do. Because oftentimes Dropbox app will ask for more than they need to, just because our permissions model isn't like granular enough. So that's one thing we're working on to sort of improve that. And in general, we're just really supportive of like the app ecosystem around Dropbox. I think we have about 2 million people every week using like a third-party Dropbox app, and we'd love to like see that increase and see people get more and more utility out of it.
Great. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Mm-hmm. I think there's one.
Is there one in the back, or?
I think there's one right there.
One over there? Can we get the mic there, please?
You can yell.
Hi. This is it working? Yeah. So you said it's rather hard to get employed at Dropbox. So I was interested in, I mean, I can imagine it is because there are like 400 really smart people already there. So what is generally the skill set needed for a tech guy to get employed at Dropbox? I'm not asking this only because I want to get employed at Dropbox. I mean, it's important to understand how these fast-growing companies think about new.
Sure. It's a little like I think we might be veering off topic a bit, but yeah, we can talk about it. So I think Dropbox's process is similar to a lot of other Silicon Valley tech companies. How the process generally works is there's some sort of resume review where they just kind of make sure that it's worth their time to interview you, and then if it is, they'll do some sort of phone screen, and at that point, it's really just about your performance on these questions they'll ask you on phone screen. So they'll ask questions write some code to reverse a linked list and see. These are all sort of technical questions, and they'll just watch you do these technical questions, try to understand how you think, try to make sure that that you feel smart and that you can sort of solve these technical problems. And I don't always like it because it doesn't feel like a perfect process to me, but it's basically about doing these questions well. And they have a lot of variety in them. There's sometimes they're really focused on algorithms, sometimes they're more focused on design. There's usually a problem or two where you don't code at all. You just kind of talk about the design of a complex system. And those are all just the sort of questions. And at that point, it's really just about how you do on the questions. It's not really about your experience or your background at that point. That stuff helps, but it's mainly just about that sort of interview performance.
Great.
I have a question, actually.
Last one?
Yeah. So, we as a company using Dropbox from the time when everything was free.
Yeah?
And then suddenly you started to charge.
That's not true.
But, I mean, it's you introduced the plans.
Well, Dropbox had plans for, unless you joined a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So through the time, you actually changed that pricing plan. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested how you decide based on what?
Yeah.
User survey, or how actually you decide how you will change that pricing plan, because it's kind of important for the startup.
Yeah.
Because you are monetizing your service, you are monetizing your work, you are trying to earn as much as possible money, but you have to go into right direction. So actually, you changed it a couple of times that direction. So how you decide where to go?
So I think we've only made it cheaper. Unless you joined really early when maybe it was all free. Ever since I've been at Dropbox, we've only just made the plan cheaper, or we've kept it the same price, but we've doubled the amount of space. And I know that before any of those changes like that, we actually developed this model. So we have this big model of how we think users value Dropbox, what we think they do with Dropbox, and how much they're willing to spend money on it. And we basically just run all these potential numbers through this model, and at the end it sort of just tells us what the expected outcome will be after doing these price changes. So the price changes are something that we'll think a lot about. We'll sort of model what we think our users are going to do, and then use that to sort of make the decisions. I'm surprised though you think that we started charging more money, because I think it's always been cost you money above a certain amount. And I think we basically made the team's plan or the business plan cheaper recently even. So this should be better.
Great. I think that's our last question for Chris. If you have any more, you can go find him out. He is super enthusiastic to talk, super jet lagged too. He just flew in from San Francisco. So 9-hour time difference. We're going to let him go get some coffee. Thank you so much. Please give a huge round of applause for Chris.